alone and miserable. Oh. Oh, man. Oh. Oh. Ah. Oh my God.
3 years of blind hate, exactly.
Wow, bro. I'm the bad guy. I'm alone and miserable. It sure seems that way, right? This is somebody that's sitting around thinking about me. This is a day before Thanksgiving. You're tweeting and thinking about me like this. You gotta get yourself right. Like, you're sitting here tweeting about me like it's your job. Asmongold is alone and miserable. Oh. Oh, man.
Every generation thinks they're special, but I believe that those of us alive today really are special. This is an exceptional phase in human evolution. The first reason is that energy is about to become abundant, and that'll remove the major constraint on innovation and growth. It's basic physics at work. Any change that doesn't naturally happen requires energy. This means we need energy for anything that we build, repair, or synthesize. Novelty needs energy. More energy, therefore, means more novelty faster. Throughout human history, energy has been very limited. It started with just human labor, then we used animals for extra power, then windmills and watermills. Eventually, we started burning fossil fuels to generate energy, first wood, then oil, then coal. In the middle of the 20th century, we added nuclear fission and solar power. And the breakthrough that's around the corner now is nuclear fusion. Nuclear fusion is special because its fuel is abundant and it has an enormously high energy density. Once we get the technology to work, the amount of power we can produce will dramatically increase. And sure, initially that'll be ridiculously expensive like any new technology, but give it a few decades and we'll, for all practical purposes, have unlimited energy, which we can then spend on mining imaginary coins. Yes, they say nuclear fusion will always be 50 years away. I think they're wrong. We can see it coming closer. In the past decade, we've seen dozens of nuclear fusion startups popping up, and it's not just empty words. These companies are really building stuff, smaller devices with more powerful magnets. They use advanced material design and AI-controlled feedback. They're trying entirely new approaches. Most of them will fail. We're not quite there yet, but there is tangible, real progress. Even the pessimistic reports now put nuclear fusion at 2050. The second reason we're special is that we're just about to begin genetic engineering. We're changing our own DNA. And this means we can take evolution into our own hands. This is not in the future. This is already beginning to happen. Scientists are curing diseases by injecting genes into cells that allow them to produce missing proteins. We know how to edit the genes of a human embryo, and I'm sure that all the hand-wringing about it will not stop it. The potential is just too large. Yes, genetic engineering of humans is very scary and can go badly wrong. In fact, I give it a 100% probability that something will go badly wrong, but it's foreseeable that we'll do it nevertheless, and I believe that the turnout will overall be positive. And the third reason this is a special time to live is that we're about to vastly enhance our cognitive functions with intelligent machines. Artificial superintelligence is just around the corner, 5, maybe 10 years, and we'll have machines more intelligent than we are. That in itself will already be a dramatic change, but I think it'll go further. We'll use these AI so frequently that eventually we'll just merge with them using some sort of implant. This is why I'm not particularly worried that AI will kill us all, because there'll be no them and us. There'll just be one new species of augmented humans. The technology for this is, again, not quite there yet. The major obstacle is that our current electrical systems are not very biocompatible. Even leaving aside that not everyone likes having holes drilled into their skull, the current implants tend to not last long and cause trouble. Scientists are still trying to come up with ways to solve this problem, and hopefully they'll find some minimally invasive solutions, nanoscale fibers or naturally growing ones, soon. And along with artificial intelligence, we'll have intelligent robots at our side. This too is something that you can see coming if you follow the tech developments. The progress in robot technology in the past years has been stunning. So these are the reasons why I'm convinced that this is indeed a special time to be alive. Energy abundance, genetic engineering, superintelligence. That's why I think that the next decades will be a blast. Chaotic, scary, but also exciting. What a time to be alive. I've been thinking about this a lot recently, about what it means in a practical way for how I should organize my life or set up that of my children. The issue is that while one can extrapolate technological progress to some extent, it's basically impossible to foresee the social and political consequences. The internet and smartphone revolutions, which have changed our lives dramatically in the past 30 years, had surprisingly little impact on society overall. But other scientific and technological inventions have not been so compatible with the existing social and political structures. The printing press, for example, very suddenly vastly increased literacy across the population, among others leading to the Reformation. Navigation and cartography led to world exploration and, unfortunately, also exploitation. The contraceptive pill, gunpowder, the Industrial Revolution, nuclear weapons, these all had dramatic social and/or political consequences. Are we facing such a shift again? Nuclear fusion fits neatly into the existing social and political systems. Genetic engineering will change society because it's foreseeable that people will specialize physically for certain professions much more than today. But I don't think it'll cause much political upheaval. Artificial superintelligence, though, that's going to change the political and social system entirely. On the political side, I believe it'll speed everything up, which is a good thing. On the social side, I'm afraid it'll increase wealth disparities, both inside of nations as well as between them. This is why I think AI is not a wait-and-see technology, because once it'll cross a certain threshold, early adopters will leave everyone in the dust and make sure there's no cheap way to catch up. This is why, personally, the way I'm prepping for the AI revolution is to not rely on the survival of our current democracy. democratic systems. They will go out of the window very quickly and be replaced by something else. In particular, I don't think the European welfare system will be around for much longer. I'm also making sure that my children are familiar with AI and its uses and problems. And yes, I'm thinking about what will happen to YouTube or social media in general. Despite what they say about the dead internet theory, I think that AI will end up making us better connected than before, simply because it'll increase our capacity to have meaningful social connections. So I'm more optimistic than pessimistic about YouTube, but ask me again tomorrow and maybe I've changed my mind. The reason I'm telling you about this is that, for one thing, while I worry a lot about things that are going wrong, I also think we're on the edge of big changes. And also because I want to hear what you think. What are you doing to prepare for the AI intelligence explosion? If anything, let me know in the comments. Every generation thinks they're special. Ours is. Then again, so were the dinosaurs, right before the interesting bit. Another conclusion I've drawn for myself is to cherish the moment. For example, with today's sponsor Novium and a special offer for the amazing hover pens. The hover pens are really masterworks of design. They float in their base thanks to strong permanent magnets and can freely spin. They are really well balanced. You don't have to fumble to put them in, and they don't drop out either. This particular
Hello wonderful person, this is Anton, and today we're going to discuss some of the recent discoveries in regards to radio observations from across the universe. But specifically, we're going to be diving into one of the most fundamental and most bizarre mysteries in cosmology that essentially centers around how fast we, our planet, our solar system, and even our galaxy are actually moving through cosmos. The mystery that's been recently highlighted in one of the recent studies that used radio observations to discover something that nobody expected. There's a slight chance right now that we're actually moving through the universe way faster than anyone imagined, and much faster than we should be moving. Which also sort of kind of contradicts some of the observations from the most mind-blowing map we've ever created, the cosmic microwave background. And so let's discuss some of these recent studies and what all of this means, but actually let's start with some of the previous discoveries and previous observations. And specifically with that CMB, the earliest light in the universe. Now, based on many different observations over the years, we know that CMB provides a lot of information about the universe around us and even about certain structures far away from us. But also CMB gives us a kind of a baseline for our speed based on what's known as the cosmic microwave dipole. But some of these most recent observations based on various radio sources super far away from us potentially identified a very serious tension, something they now refer to as radio dipole anomaly. And this is not just some kind of a little error. Here this has 5.4 sigma discrepancy. In this case, this means that it seems to be really there, and it has to be addressed in some of the future studies because right now it doesn't have an explanation. And that's basically what we're going to be discussing today, trying to figure out what these observations mean and trying to explore potential answers for this new bizarre mystery.
What? Is that like a Pokemon does that? What? Is that like
But in order to understand what's really happening and why this is a mystery, let's actually talk about the observations and the measurements and how they're conducted. And so first we need to understand the baseline, the CMB dipole. The dipole that in simpler terms would look something like this. Now, what exactly are we looking at here? Well, remember, CMB is the earliest light in the universe. It was released approximately 380,000 years after the Big Bang, when the hot plasma that the universe used to be made out of finally turned into particles and allowed the light to travel through. And so as this light stretched and cooled for billions of years, it eventually turned very hot photons of about 3000 Kelvin into the photons that we observe today at approximately 2.725 Kelvin that we refer to as the cosmic microwave background. So basically this very faint microwave glow that comes from every single direction around us and that represents the remnants of this early light. And here the uniformity of CMB is incredibly important because it essentially supports the cosmological principle. The idea that even on the large scale, even if you travel for billions of light years in one direction, the universe is supposed to be the same and have the same laws and same properties because it literally looks the same in every direction in the CMB. In scientific terms, this is referred to as homogeneous and isotropic. But as we've discussed in previous videos, CMB is not perfectly uniform. It does have these tiny variations or anisotropies, which we believe were formed by some of the very early structures in the universe that created these slight temperature differences. For example, galactic clusters would make something appear just a little bit different, possibly making it appear just a little bit hotter, and likewise, galactic voids might make this light appear just a little bit colder. But here there's another variation that seems to be on a large scale. There's a slight temperature difference of 0.0035 Kelvin, going from the west to the east, as you can see right here, with one side being slightly blue shifted and the opposite side being slightly red shifted. And well, as you can imagine, this seems to be the result of motion. The motion of the solar system and the motion of the galaxy with respect to the so-called rest frame or cosmic frame that then creates this Doppler effect. And this motion has been calculated quite precisely and seems to be approximately 370 kilometers per second. And so basically here we seem to be moving in a certain direction at 370 kilometers per second. This has been established many years ago and seems to have been true up until relatively recently. Okay, now let's talk about the radio sky. This is obviously based on observations in slightly longer wavelengths and does show us very different features. And just to give you an example, here is the microwave radiation and here is the radio observations. Here what you're looking at is of course the Milky Way. But crucially, it's important not to confuse the microwave dipole with the radio dipole, because technically they're measuring different things. And so the CMB dipole measures temperature, but the radio dipole is currently based on measurements of distant objects, specifically distant quasars, mostly focusing on their brightness. But here we have this very important question. If the universe truly follows the cosmological principle and is the same everywhere, would the measurements from CMB also be reproducible using radio sources in the same way we can see it in the CMB? Or just to rephrase this, does the CMB dipole align with the radio dipole? And if the cosmological principle is correct, the answer should be yes. The CMB dipole should be very similar to the radio dipole, or should be at least somewhat correlated. But for radio sources, this can only be done by counting distant galaxies. This is known as the kinematic source count dipole. Okay, how does this work? It's essentially driven by two effects from motion, the Doppler shift and aberration. So when it comes to the Doppler shift, as we move toward the distant radio galaxy, the radio waves become blue shifted, making the source appear just a little bit brighter. However, if we move away from something, the waves are red shifted, making the object appear fainter. And so since the surveys only count sources above certain brightness limit, we naturally count more bright sources in the direction we're moving, and fewer sources in the opposite direction. So basically we should be seeing more galaxies toward one side of the dipole and less galaxies on the other side. And when it comes to aberration, this effect is supposed to shift the apparent position of some sources toward the direction of our motion. And so together these physical effects suggest that we can count radio galaxies and we should see slightly more of them in the direction we're headed toward. Here we're talking about the constellation of Centaurus, and fewer in the opposite direction. But crucially, the size or the amplitude of this measurement has to match the observations from the CMB. But some of the previous surveys, especially surveys using infrared telescopes, sometimes found a bit of a problem. There was a bit of an inconsistency with the expected size of the dipole, and it was not matching the CMB dipole that's been studied rigorously for many years. And this new study in 2025 seems to report this again, but this time using additional observations and independent calculations. So let's discuss this very recent 2025 analysis, which combines data from 3 massive wide area radio surveys referred to as LOTS DR2, RAXLOW, and NVSS. But here researchers had to address one major complication. Many radio sources are actually made up of multiple components, which previous studies could not resolve and which often resulted in less accuracy. And so traditionally in some of the previous studies, some of these multi-component sources led to over-dispersion, or basically a lot of additional errors. To fix this team developed a new statistical estimator, with this new mathematical method increasing the measurements dramatically and making the results much more realistic, accounting for previous mistakes. And well, surprisingly, this combined measurement once again discovered that the radio sources do not match the CMB, and specifically the radio source count dramatically exceed the expected value by a factor of 3.7, which translates to approximately 5.4 sigma when it comes to statistical analysis. Or to, I guess, rephrase this is extremely unlikely to be a random probability fluke, and right now the observations strongly suggest that the solar system, and of course our galaxy, seem to be moving across the universe 3.7 times faster than the current cosmological predictions based on the cosmic microwave background. And that means that we might be moving at approximately 1370 km per second instead of 370. But interestingly, even though the amplitude is wildly different, the overall direction for radio dipole is more or less the same. The overall angular separation is less than 5 degrees and could just be due to uncertainty. So the overall direction is consistent and matches previous observations. But there's a really important side note here. Right now this is still somewhat preliminary. As a matter of fact, some of the studies, especially studies using other telescopes such as MeerKAT and the MeerKAT Absorption Line Survey, seem to have found results that do align with the CMB expectations and sort of contradict the study, which potentially suggests that there is a problem with some of these surveys, or that the way that these wide area surveys are designed and conducted may actually produce some kind of a discrepancy. In other words, this might be a measurement issue and not a universe issue. And so there might be some kind of a systematic error or some kind of a bias, because radio astronomy is notoriously challenging to precisely calibrate across wide fields and occasionally leads to these systematic errors, especially the ones that operate at different radio frequencies. But here it's unlikely to be a systematic error across multiple surveys, because the results also seem to mimic previous observations using infrared quasars and infrared surveys as well. There was also this bizarre dipole detection that's difficult to explain, so the anomaly could be real after all. And that means that the question is, why? Why is there such a massive discrepancy between microwave dipole and radio dipole that seems to be 3.7 times larger? Well, if this is confirmed, this is definitely going to be a major challenge for the cosmological standard model. But we do have some potential explanations. Now, one explanation that nobody wants to deal with is, well, maybe the cosmological model is incorrect. Maybe the universe is not isotropic and is actually different in different directions, and thus changes property over distance. But a much more likely explanation, and the one that scientists are leaning toward, is what's known as the local bulk flow. The excess of motion in this case could be caused by a very large-scale motion of matter that could be the result of some kind of a major structure such as the cosmic web and our position in it. Or basically, our local cosmic neighborhood might be moving much faster than expected because we're just located in this river of galaxies and are just headed in a certain direction. This would actually not violate any principles and does align with a lot of modern observations and modern propositions, but would also suggest that we're basically inside this very difficult to detect river that needs to be studied more in order for us to understand the universe itself. If you actually want to learn more about the cosmic web, check out some of the previous videos in the description. And so in short, we have no idea what's happening, but something seems to be happening. There seems to be a bit of a discrepancy between observations in the radio light compared to the cosmic microwave background and additional deviations in the infrared. And though both observations confirm that we're moving toward the constellation of Centaurus, which is, by the way, where the famous Great Attractor is located, here the observations in radio light and the microwave light give us very different velocity. And so we're left with two conflicting fundamental measurements. The cosmic microwave background that's been used to define the universal rest frame tells us we're moving at 370 km per second, but observations of distant radio sources suggest we're moving at almost 1400 kilometers per second, and currently that makes no sense. So essentially this reminds us that there's still so much more to discover, and we still don't really understand our place in the cosmos. But the solution to this mystery will most likely rely on some of the future surveys, including upcoming Large Area Sky Survey known as LOTSS DR3, and eventually surveys conducted by super large telescopes such as the Square Kilometer Array. This will definitely provide us with more accurate data and potentially help us pinpoint the origin of this excess radio dipole. And so whether the universe is fundamentally different and not isotropic, or we're just moving through some kind of a giant cosmic current inside the cosmic web, only time will tell. For now, the questions remain open. And that means we'll come back and discuss them more in some of the future videos. Thank you for watching, subscribe, come back tomorrow to learn something else, support this channel on Patreon where you can find additional videos without any ads and can DM me directly, or by joining channel membership that grants you early access. You can also buy the Wonderful Person t-shirt in the description below. Stay wonderful, I'll see you tomorrow, and as always, bye bye. Hello wonderful person, this is Anton, and today we're going to be discussing computer simulations when it comes to trying to simulate something absolutely enormous in outer space. And what you've seen right here is actually one of these simulations I've been using for several years. This is referred to as TNG50 Single Galaxy Formation Simulation, created by something known as the Illustris project. The project that I've used in a lot of different videos because they create some of the best and some of the most advanced simulations of what possibly happened in a universe for billions of years. But for decades, one of the central missions of computational astrophysics has been actually to recreate our home galaxy, the Milky Way, by using some kind of a supercomputer and by essentially trying to see how it evolves and how it changes over time. But this isn't just about making pretty pictures and pretty videos, it is about testing foundational theories of galactic formation and astrophysics, and of course trying to understand how elements necessary for life, like for example carbon, oxygen, and even iron, were initially synthesized and then spread across the galaxy in order to form objects like planet Earth. And this is fundamental for trying to answer the questions in regards to astrobiology and the fundamental questions in regards to the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. But the thing is, the Milky Way contains over 100 billion stars, possibly as many as 400 billion. And so it's a spectacular system of stars, interstellar gas, and of course the invisible dark matter, all inside a massive halo. And so trying to simulate this on even the most powerful supercomputer has been a huge challenge. Because in this case we're talking about simulations of everything, including individual stars, in order to see how the galaxy changes and how everything evolves. And so this has been a kind of a holy grail in computational astrophysics. And until recently, this was practically impossible. We just did not have the ways to simulate hundreds of billions of particles in order to reproduce this system. And now we do. In November of 2025, pretty much everything changed because scientists have finally accomplished it. This was a major breakthrough and involved the intersection between high-performance computing with some of the modern machine learning and artificial intelligence advances that allowed scientists to finally simulate this without making the computers explode. And so this is essentially what we're going to be discussing today. We're going to be discussing this Japanese paper on the first ever star-by-star simulation of the Milky Way galaxy, an incredible technical achievement that finally broke a critical supercomputer barrier, and of course paved the way for simulations that are even more complex, possibly exceeding previous scales. But before we discuss how exactly this was done, it is still important to understand why this is so difficult. And so in this case, it's not really the individual particles, but it's the underlying dynamics of the galaxy that are involved. And that's because here, all of these individual billions and billions of particles have to also produce some kind of an interaction on one another. And so we need to model the gravity, we also have to model dark matter and gas, and all of this has to resemble fluid dynamics, which usually govern how interstellar gas behaves. And normally this is done using what's known as n-body smooth particle hydrodynamics, also known as SPH. And this is where we treat stars and dark matter as individual n-body particles that have to respond to gravity and have to influence each other. But the gas is modeled using hydrodynamics, using SPH particles. But to add to this complexity, this also involves enormous differences in scale. Basically here, this is also a kind of a multi-scale problem. And that's because some of these dark matter particles may stretch over 500 to 600,000 light years across, but within this massive volume, we also have stars forming molecular clouds somewhere in the center. On top of this, these simulations also have to try to simulate explosions of massive stars that can often produce very hot gas up to about 10 million Kelvin. And so here there's a lot of temperature variation, there's a lot of scale, and there's a lot of different activity. As a matter of fact, many years ago, I used to use this simulation referred to as the universe sandbox, and in that simulation, even to produce n-body particles in some kind of a very tiny galaxy would basically completely stop my computer. And that would just involve a few thousand particles, not hundreds of billion particles. But it's really these very explosive events and these very dramatic changes, such as supernova, that are normally the bottlenecks in simulations. Mostly because they usually happen very fast and only last for a few years, but do end up producing important changes inside the galaxy. And so in order to capture some of these impacts, and in order to see how these explosions affect the galaxy, which usually involves injecting crucial energy and a lot of heavy elements into surrounding gas, the simulation has to use extremely small time steps in order to see changes in real time. So basically you cannot just skip like a year and expect the simulation to be accurate. But in contrast, the galaxy itself operates on extremely slow timescales. Here, for example, a single rotation of a disk will take at least 100 million years. And so in these simulations, if there is a supernova, the entire system suddenly has to slow down in order to account for these very fast, very small events. And this constraint even has the name in computational astrophysics. It's referred to as Courant-Friedrich-Lewis condition. So it's a pretty well-known problem. And that means that trying to simulate the evolution of a single star that could take up to 10 billion years may require a lot of individual steps as small as 100 years in order to make this extremely accurate. And so very often this is also referred to as the billion particle barrier. And before 2025, even the most powerful supercomputers were almost limited to using less than 1 billion particles, because otherwise the simulations became extremely inaccurate. And for many simulations using galaxies like this one right here, they had to find some kind of a compromise, very often resolution. Here even the smallest particle is actually size of a massive cluster of stars, sometimes up to 400 million solar masses. I mean, from a distance it still looks like a galaxy, but if you were to zoom in, here the pixels would be absolutely huge. You would not be able to distinguish individual stars. But nevertheless, in the last 10 years or so, we did actually have quite a few really important and now famous simulations. And well, again, the most important one is still the Illustris project, a massive series of astrophysical simulations designed to study galactic formation and evolution, but very often trying to focus on the entire universe of approximately 13.8 billion years. And this project spawned a lot of successors and a lot of additional research, and is still going on pretty strongly today. But I guess more importantly, it's all of course absolutely free and available to everyone, which is of course how I'm able to use these videos. They're essentially on the web. Then, more recently, we also discussed the EAGLE project. Here EAGLE stands for Evolution and Assembly of Galaxies in Their Environments, and this was a simulation of an enormous volume of space of 300 million light years, In this case, to some extent, finally beating that billion particle barrier. And that's because here they managed to use 7 billion particles that modeled dark matter, gas, and star formation, and even effects from exploding stars and supermassive black holes. This was actually a pretty big achievement, and you can learn more about this in one of the videos from a few years back. Then we have some other simulations like the Magneticum simulations, which also try to create structures across cosmological scales, but also try to emulate star formation and chemical evolution from various supernova, and the effects from magnetic fields and black holes. But again, most of these are usually under 1 billion particles, and very often involve very low resolutions. And then we have this breakthrough. And so here researchers developed a new scheme that successfully merged some of the conventional physical simulations with deep learning techniques that can use certain types of predictions in order to simulate the galaxy just a little bit faster. And the goal was pretty simple. They wanted to create the first star-by-star galactic simulation, basically meaning that the resolution in this case would be one star. Instead of having a cluster of something that's more massive, each little particle would be one of the stars in the Milky Way. And well, to do this, they had to try to create something with at least 300 billion particles. And the key innovation in this case was in trying to avoid the small required time steps associated with supernova explosions. And here they were able to do this by basically first identifying when the star is supposed to go supernova, and instead of forcing the entire simulation to slow down, the affected region of gas, or the small cube around the supernova, is instead sent to a very small separate specialized computing node referred to as a pool node. So basically it kind of results in its own individual simulation. And this pool node then uses deep learning models previously trained on high-resolution simulations of supernova in order to predict resulting distribution of gas, density, and temperature. And so basically here AI is used to try to simulate these supernova explosions and then return the results. And while these pool nodes are running the AI predictions, the main simulation continues, integrating the rest of the galaxy at its normal, much larger time step. And these AI predictions fully overlap with the main integration, bypassing the short and efficient time steps traditionally required for these supernova events. And so as this predicted data is then returned to the simulation, it allows the galaxy to continue its evolution with all of the materials and energy accounted for. And this method was then rigorously validated, confirming that these models seem to be indistinguishable from other simulations and seem to produce exactly the same results. But this new way delivers a staggering improvement in computational efficiency. Now, first of all, this is still not something you can run on your computer, and even my computer that I use for recording is not nearly enough to do any of this, even to replay the results from the simulation, with the initial calculations being done on 7.1 million computer cores, producing 850,000 nodes on supercomputers like Fugaku. And in a typical supercomputer, this would have taken at least 315 hours. And this was just to model 1 million years. And so obviously in order to simulate 13.8 billion years of Milky Way evolution, it would take almost 500 years. But using this AI surrogate model, they managed to achieve the same performance in approximately 2.7 hours. So basically over 100 times faster, which means that in theory, we could now simulate the entire galaxy in just under 5 years. Now for supercomputers running with a lot of energy, this is still a little bit too long, but at least now it's a lot more feasible. More importantly, we can now simulate at least 1 billion years of Milky Way's history in approximately 115 days. Although at this point, nothing like this has been done yet, and this is right now just the proof of concept, with only a few hours of simulations conducted. But the primary scientific implications here are pretty large. Mostly because we can now combine supercomputers with some of the AI techniques to generate extremely high precision simulations, and more importantly, high resolution simulations, to test theories of galactic structure, stellar evolution, and enrichment in chemical elements across the galaxy, which physically allows us to trace fundamental processes that at some point in the past obviously produced life on Earth, and allows us to see how chemical elements synthesized in stars spreads with supernova explosions across the whole galaxy. And so here we have an ability to resolve these complex, short time-scale phenomena like supernova, while also efficiently integrating this into large-scale models with long time-scale dynamics. Or basically we can actually see what happens on a small scale and on a grand scale, even though previously this was very difficult. And once again, the main achievement here is really these AI predictors that create these individual pool nodes that prevent the simulation from slowing down. But if it's not obvious yet, this is not just about astrophysics and modeling galaxies, because this technique can now be applied to so much more, with the most important application of course being weather. We can now actually use this for very precise weather and climate models that also very often require linking small-scale turbulent processes with large-scale global patterns. In other words, by using these simulations, it can now also become possible to possibly predict things like hurricanes or freak weather events before they actually happen. And so the main point in this work is that it's now possible to integrate some of the previously used AI models that can fundamentally improve supercomputer processing power, moving beyond simple pattern recognition, and actually establishing these deep learning tools as crucial tools for scientific discovery and scientific prediction. And more importantly here, by breaking this billion particle barrier and achieving a true star-by-star resolution, we're essentially entering a new era for virtual universe simulations, something that can actually finally match true scale of the Milky Way and can obviously show us what the galaxy might look like in billions of years from today, or what it looked like in the past. But once again, more importantly, this will one day hopefully help us answer questions about why and how life formed on planet Earth, and where else it might be possible in the Milky Way galaxy, because basically by tracing these chemical elements, we might be able to find some of these answers. Anyway, we'll definitely discuss this more in some of the future videos. Until then, you can check out some of the previous videos on other simulations in the description below. Thank you for watching, subscribe, come back tomorrow to learn something else, support this channel on Patreon where you can find additional videos without any ads and can DM me directly, or by joining a channel membership that grants you early access. You can also support this channel by buying the wonderful % t-shirt in the description below. Stay wonderful, I'll see you tomorrow, and as always, bye bye.
I want to tell you something about a kind of star you've never seen. Not the ones that light up our night sky, or the ones that explode in brilliant supernovas, or even the ones that collapse into neutron stars. This star is different. It doesn't shine or burn, and its nature challenges everything we assume about stars. Astronomers call it an exotic star, a class of objects that exist more in theory than in observation. Some are so strange they blur the line between science and imagination. And recently, physicists proposed an even wilder version, a star that can be nested inside another and then another. It sounds really weird, but it's true. They've even given them a name, nest stars. What makes them fascinating isn't just their odd structure, it's what they might reveal about the universe itself. If these objects exist, they could explain one of the biggest mysteries in modern science, why the universe is expanding faster and faster, driven by something we call dark energy. So the question is, are the dark hearts of galaxies what we think they are, or could they be hiding something far stranger?